My name is Ashleigh Powell, and I did my lesson on sink or float. So this lesson could be for kindergarten or first grade, and it meets the kindergarten standard for physical science, which I listed right here, and then it also meets the first grade standard for physical science. And I found those on a 2016 updated list of standards for Indiana. The objectives that this lesson would cover, so for this specific lesson, I would say that students will be able to understand what type of objects will sink and float, and students will be able to understand how density and weight affect objects, and that will be covered in this lesson and through the course of the unit. And then more of like a unit objective that I would put, which would probably be covered in the next lesson, because that's just what would make sense to go in order, would be that students would be able to understand what buoyancy means. And then for prior knowledge, I'm going to assume that students know that lighter objects are going to flow and stay at the surface of the water, while heavier objects will most likely sink and go below the water. So the materials that you need for this would be small plastic tubs, I would say about 8 inches deep, because you're going to end up filling the tub with half full of water, and then water, so enough to fill the tubs half full. A variety of objects that will both sink and float, like water, corks, metal rings, bouncy balls, buttons, anything else that you could find that would be in the student's everyday life. And then lots of paper towels, because they're kindergartners and first graders, so they're probably going to make a mess. And a class set of the floating and sinking worksheets, which you guys actually have at the very back of your packets. So the procedure, the whole lesson is going to take about an hour. So the procedure, you can introduce this topic for your students, just kind of give them a general understanding of what sinking is and what floating is. And then flip to the next page. If you model this for your students, there's just a better chance that they will understand what to do. So you can grab different objects in your classroom, like you could grab a marker or a dry erase, like a dry erase board eraser, just to kind of drop them in the tub and show students like this is what you're supposed to be doing, but with their specific objects. And then you're going to let them go through and take the objects like the bouncy ball, the rubber bands, or paper clips or anything, and do this on their own. And while they're doing this, they're going to create a float pile. So anything that they drop in there, let's say they have a piece of paper, they drop it in the water, it's going to float, so they're going to put that in the float pile. And then if they drop the bouncy ball in there and it sinks, they're going to put that in the sink pile. And that'll take about 10-15 minutes. And then at the end, you're going to be walking around, and the assessment part will be kind of determining if they're understanding their float and sink piles. So you're going to make sure they have the right things in the float pile, right things in the sink pile. And then the back of this actually has a worksheet that you're going to ask your students to fill out and circle the things that float and circle the things that sink. I know that someone else had done this lesson, and there was an apple at the bottom. I decided to do a beach ball instead, just because apples do float, but students will see them and think that they are heavy, so they should sink. And since buoyancy isn't really going to be talked about in this specific lesson, I decided that an apple that would really get into the buoyancy part, that would be done in the next lesson, so the beach ball just fit better with this. And then also for the assessment part, if you would like to kind of gauge how the students are understanding from your teaching, you can give them a piece of paper and tell them to come up with two new objects that they think will sink and 2 new objects that they think will float, and write that down so that way they can apply that to real life other than just the objects that they were given. And then for my content part, I said that it covers a lot of different content. Actually, it's structure and function, scale, proportion, quantity, floating and sinking, obviously, and then the broad category would be physical science. And these are science concepts that will be taught in this lesson. You can use this as a starting point to teach buoyancy, volume, weight, mass, water displacement, further talk about boats. And then for context, sinking and floating, it's pretty relevant to everyone. It's important to understand what type of objects will sink and which ones will float. And all demographic groups need to learn about floating and sinking, especially those who use technology of any form, because that's really talked about in Western modern science. And then critique, you could talk about like different boats, so specifically the Titanic sank before, and there's just different statistics that you could update them with. that it kind of had some ethnic exploitation. If you look up statistics for the Titanic, that's kind of the critiquing part. I guess we'll turn this thing on.
Yeah, that's why I just thought that.